So this homily, this brief homily that I want to offer is about the dark night of the soul. Not a happy topic, but I will make it lighter. It's about how to navigate the dark night, how to benefit from it, how to endure it. So the phrase, the dark night of the soul, comes from a Spanish monk that we know as John of the Cross. I'll say more about him in a moment. He's a very interesting fellow to know something about. In my own teaching ministry, I have always worked better laboring under some sort of theme so that I could kind of know where I'm going next. I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, and we like to plan ahead what's going to happen next. And for a long time, I've lived under the theme of living between the no longer and the not yet. Because we live in a period of time when one way of thinking about our cosmos is coming to an end, and a new one is just beginning. I mean, we learned that with the Hubble telescope, and now with the new telescope that is out, and everybody is just so excited about all the images that are coming back. Some, they say, from 300 billion light years away. How they know that, I'm not entirely sure, but it is really a new ballgame in understanding the energy field that we live in. We live in an exciting time. So this has given rise to a lot of emotions. It gives rise to excitement and what's out there. It gives rise to thinking that we may not be as significant as we thought we were. We're not. It gives rise to a lot of anxiety for people. It gives rise to a lot of fear for people. Fear and anxiety are closely related, and they sometimes meld together for people to create anger. There is a Lutheran, very popular Lutheran minister, our senior pastor likes her a lot, Nadia Bose-Weber, who has come up with a new word for this called frage. It's a combination of fear and rage, which makes sense. We live in a time of frage. Lots going on in the world right now that makes that word very applicable. You can see it clearly on the faces of those people who invaded the Capitol on January 6th. And you can also see it in a more subdued way on the faces of people who are trying to do something about that. Now, I don't want this homily to be a downer, but again, there is a lot going on in the world that we could be concerned about, to be frightened about, to be angry about, to be sad about. I think about the war in Ukraine, for example. I think the never-ending onslaught that comes to us in this country because of guns and mass killings. I think about the Supreme Court's decision to rescind abortion rights. I think about inflation that I read in the paper today is spiraling so out of control that prices are higher than they've been in decades. I think about the crisis that's going on in the United Methodist Church that's affecting all of us. The word frage is understandable. So this realization I had some time ago is that culturally, globally, but certainly in this country and for a lot of reasons, we have entered what might be called the dark night of the soul. And I said that phrase comes from a Spanish mystic whom we know as John of the Cross. Now, that was not his real name. It's a tradition for people undergoing monastic life when they undergo vows to take a new name, a name that's not their given name. For example, in the monastery, Thomas Merton was known as Father Louis, not as Thomas Merton. So John's given name in Spain was, and I will mispronounce that, Juan de Yepes de Alvarez. And he was born in 1542. He didn't live long. He lived only to the age of 49. And he was enlisted by a woman whose name was Teresa of Avila, who's another great mystic of the Spanish church, to help in the reform movement of things that she thought had gone wrong in the Catholic Church in Spain at that time. So these two people have left a mark on the contemplative tradition in the Christian tradition, perhaps like no other two people have. They have written works that are considered the definitive explorations of meditation and contemplation in the Christian tradition. And they are essential for guiding us through the dark night. As a matter of fact, as I said, John came up with the phrase, dark night of the soul. And to this day, the writings of these two people are considered essential in the curriculum if you want to train to be a spiritual director. So my teacher, Jim Finley, who had Thomas Merton as his spiritual director, taught me a lot about these writings of Teresa and John of the Cross. Jim Finley is an expert in the writings of these two people. I read John of the Cross. It's not a hard thing to read. It's a little quaint. But one of the delightful things about John of the Cross is he didn't use religious language. He was very much like Jesus in the sense that he knew that if he was going to get his message across to people, he was going to have to use the language of the day. Stories that were quite moving, but they weren't religious. Jesus didn't take his stories from the Torah. He took his stories from the everyday life of people around him, people losing coins and sheep and planting crops and that sort of thing. So for months now, I've been going back and rereading Teresa and John of the Cross and other books related to the dark night of the soul to see if I could find things that would be helpful in my own teaching here. Now, you will not find a single spiritual teacher, whether from centuries ago or from present time, who won't counsel you that if you want to find a way to navigate this period of time, you need to have a daily spiritual practice, which is something that I harp on all the time. John of the Cross talked about the importance of having a daily spiritual practice. Teresa of Avila talked about having daily spiritual practice. Now, the spiritual practices that both of these people talk about consist of two things. They consist of meditation, and they consist of contemplation. Those are not the same. Meditation might consist of what we're doing now, might consist of verbal prayers, might consist of reading the scripture, might consist of walking the labyrinth out here, might consist in doing social work, going on a mission tour, something like that. More active works, whether they're spoken aloud or reading or writing or interactive. Contemplation, on the other hand, consists of non-discursive periods of time, periods spent in silence, periods spent in being receptive. Now, there's a story, whether it is true or not, I'm not sure, where a reporter asked Mother Teresa of Calcutta if it was true that she prayed 2 hours a day. And she said that it was. And the reporter said, well, what if you don't have time in your busy schedule to pray 2 hours a day? What do you do? And Mother Teresa said, well, then I pray 2 hours a day. If I don't have an hour to pray, I pray 2 hours a day. And the reporter says, good grief, what during that time do you say to God? And Mother Teresa said, I don't say anything. I just listen. And the reporter says, oh, well then what does God say during that period of time? And she said, God doesn't say anything. God just listens. This is an example of what in spiritual teaching is called non-dual mind. So while working on this homily, I had a memory that came back to me from many, 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 many years ago when I was in seminary. And I was taking a graduate course on the Psalms. And I had been given the assignment to do a word study on the word wait, W-A-I-T, that is in the Psalms. And that led me to look at the word wait in all of the Hebrew scripture. Now, some of you are familiar, particularly if you attend church a lot, you've heard some of these phrases, wait on the Lord, They that wait upon the Lord shall inherit the earth. My soul waits for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. The word wait is used over 100 times in the Hebrew scripture. Now, interesting thing about Hebrew, as well as Aramaic, is that these are picture languages. Hebrew doesn't have a very extensive vocabulary, fewer than probably 2,000 words, but the words are picture words. The words draw pictures of things. So that one of the words for wait in the Hebrew scripture is a word that pictures a rope that is made up of many strands of cord that's pulled taut, like you would get it really tight. And that is the picture word, one of the picture words for wait. Another one of the picture words for wait is the word that we might translate into taking a nap, taking a siesta, resting back. So there's a line in the Psalms that reads, my soul waits for the Lord more than they that watch for the morning. You can almost see the picture that the word wants to draw of the watchman that's standing on tiptoe, waiting eagerly for the sun to come up and to see what's going to happen. He's waiting, just tensely waiting. There's another word for wait in the Hebrew language, and it's this quiet, meditative, passive waiting, like a sheep in a pasture being led gently by waters. They that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. There's 40 years of waiting in the whole Old Testament where the children of Israel wait to get to the Promised Land. There's 50 years of exile where they wait for some activity to release them. There's Jesus 40 days in the wilderness being tempted. A kind of waiting that implies a certain kind of not knowing, a kind of not having, a kind of simply being open and receptive. Now, it's not one kind of waiting at one time and another kind of waiting at another time. It's both at the same time. That's one example of non-dual mind, although you can't really put non-dual stuff in the English language. Our rational, logical minds can't grasp it. So I began to go back and reread John of the Cross, Dark Night of the Soul, and to begin to read Teresa of Avila. And guess what? Both of them use the story that's in the gospel that we read today as an example of meditation and contemplation. They use this story of Mary and Martha as an example of how to endure the dark night of the soul. Now, usually the story of Mary and Martha has been used to say that we should all be like Mary and sit at the feet of Jesus, taking up his words, soaking up his words. Actually, all students sat at the feet of the teacher, not just the ones who were, not just Mary in this story. It was the typical way to receive rabbinic teachings. And very sadly, I think this story has been used mostly by preachers to say, you should listen to me. But that's not how John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila used the story. For them, and their insistence on the importance of spiritual practice, they say it's both things. It's both and at the same time. You have to be Martha and you have to be Mary at the same time. So the writings of John and Teresa, which I think rival those of Freud and Jung, and they have a great insight in what, as a psychologist, I would call attachment theory, or certainly great insight into what we would call addiction issues of our time. But each of them stress that God is inside of you. God is inside the person sitting next to you. God is sitting inside the person that you will encounter when you leave here. When they talk about soul, they're not talking about something you have. They're talking about someone you are. Since for them we are already in union with God, with sacred mystery, this union is not something that we can achieve or seek for. It's something we already have. It's something we become aware of, and we become aware of that through the daily spiritual practice of meditation and contemplation. So if the dark night of the soul leads us to become aware of and experience this union that already exists, then the dark night is considered to be a good thing, a valuable thing, an essential experience. So for John and Teresa, there are these two kinds of waiting. There's the meditation and there's the contemplation. And here's where they use the story of Mary and Martha. Martha, who is busy in the kitchen, preparing food, taking care of guests, is an example of meditation. Meditation is an active undertaking, something one does. One prays, one reads, one participates in rituals, one attends services, attends talks, engages in acts of social justice, and on and on and on. And the metaphor they use is going into a garden and taking care of the plants in the ways that gardeners take care of plants. It's Martha in the kitchen. Mary, sitting at the feet of Jesus, is an example of contemplation. And in contemplation, we are the plants in the garden that are receiving the benefits of the gardener, as well as the benefits of the sun and the rain and the fertilizer and other things that help us to grow. And it's not one kind of practice at one time and another at another. It's both and at the same time. Yes, it is hard to get your head around. And I remember asking my teacher, Jim Finley, how do you communicate this in writings and sermons? And he says, you don't. It communicates itself. Maybe it communicates itself perfectly when we're at the table, which we will be in a few minutes. It's nonverbal. You actively get up and come forward and take. And then you receive. It's both and at the same time. This is the way we navigate, endure, and benefit from the dark night. And I commend it to you.